So after all that curiosity about what the all-new origin story was gonna be for Michael Bay and John Liebsman's new Ninja Turtles movie, the answer seems to be the same all-new origin story from the Amazing Spider-Man reboot.
People want heroes, Miss O'Neill. But heroes are not born. They're created. That's what your father and I were trying to do.
Dr. Connors, I'm Richard Parker's son.
Your father and I were gonna change the lives of millions, including mine.
Because if you're gonna steal, you might as well steal from the least interesting part of one of the most underwhelming blockbusters in recent memory. And also, for some reason, that same action beat with the cell phone tower. Cowabunga? Now look, there was a lot wrong with Amazing Spider-Man, but the junky new origin story was a big part of it, especially because it did that same thing the Ultimate Comics always tried to do, where they shrunk down the universe so everything relates back to one or two sources. So now instead of a whole universe of possibilities, everything just goes back to Oscorp and Richard Parker's stupid spider research. Apart from being boring, it actually undermines Spider-Man as a character. Having all these bad guys from dozens of different backgrounds and power sources helped reinforce the idea that even if he's got cool spider powers, the original Peter Parker was still just one guy in a huge scary world. Likewise, I can't see how basically the same new origin doesn't similarly undermine the Turtles. Being the result of an accident, dropped into a life they didn't ask for, inheriting an arch-nemesis whose initial beef was actually with Splinter, constantly getting swept up into other people's conflicts with aliens or Rat Kings or whatever, that was a big part of reinforcing that they were actively seeking identity and direction of their own. That's the teenage part in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But now, they and April and this white guy who's going to be the new Shredder for some reason, and TCRI and whatever else, it's all just going to happen to be connected, as though all of this has been prearranged by some kind of destiny? Well, of course it is, because heroic destiny is the lazy modern screenplay's best friend and thus Hollywood's favorite overused trope of all. See, modern Hollywood loves destiny as a storytelling crutch because a few decades back, eggheads started to write think pieces about how Star Wars was a success because it adhered to the universal structure of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and monomyth theory. And since the recurring myths that Campbell focused on often featured chosen or destined heroes, that aspect of his actually much more complex theory became something hack screenwriters and the producers who love them fixated on, which is ironic since that's not actually what Star Wars was ever about, but that's a story for another day. Because while in actual mythology, destiny is something heroes wrestle with and struggle to define, to Hollywood, it's just a way to cut corners on character, motivation, and plot. A modern secular version of having because God says so as the driving force of an entire story. No need to think up a personality-based or situation-driven reason for your hero to go on a quest or fight a particular villain, it's their destiny to do it. Done. Wasn't that easy? A regular guy making do in the wrong place at the wrong time? Nah, that's too much work to set up. And then how are you going to validate an audience's universal projected fantasy of being the most special perfect snowflake in the whole wide world just because? And they've been shoveling this slop for so long, you no longer even need to say the word destiny anymore. Nobody ever really says it in Spider-Man, and I doubt they will in Turtles, but they don't need to. It's implied by the otherwise improbable cluster of coincidental relationships and the red flag presence of absent daddy figures leaving unfinished business because family and legacy and ties and other pseudo-spiritual gobbledygook. Funny thing though, the evidence that destiny has stopped working as any kind of reliable story device in Hollywood movies is clearly demonstrated by the preponderance of good recent movies that outright rejected it. Consider most prominently The Avengers. Tony Stark isn't destined to be Iron Man, he builds it himself. Steve Rogers auditioned to become Captain America. The Hulk got his powers by accident. Thor thought he had a heroic destiny, but he screwed up and had to earn all of his powers back. Hawkeye and Black Widow are just S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, they're getting paid to be here. On the other hand, check out the nonsensical hash Man of Steel made of the Superman story, which should be impossible to up, by trying to turn him into the chosen one for no good reason, apparently deciding that the Moses and or Jesus parables weren't blatant enough as it is. Hell, this even comes up in the new Star Trek. Instead of having to come together as a unit through chance and building relationships through camaraderie and experience like actual interesting fully dimensional characters would, Kirk and Spock and Uhura and Chekhov and all the rest are all teamed up because elderly time-traveling future Spock, who now functions as some kind of fortune-telling wizard, tells them that's how it's supposed to be. Destiny. Now, that's not to say that destiny can never make for a compelling story. In fact, it happens all the time. You remember Kung Fu Hustle? That was a fun movie, and it used destiny in a fun and poignant way. The main character was a guy who wanted to be this badass master criminal, but he kept failing at it. Eventually, it's revealed that he was informed that he had a heroic destiny as a kid, but because it didn't come into play exactly how he wanted it to, he's been trying to reject it, and that's why he sucks at being evil. Now, this actually works there because partially it's a distinctly Buddhist philosophical take on karmic destiny, but also because it's built into the narrative and the original characters from the ground up, up by writer-director star Stephen Chow. It doesn't work when applied to Spider-Man or Captain Kirk or the Turtles, largely because a destiny narrative is being forced onto characters whose original conception not only didn't employ destiny, they were built around the opposite philosophy. Spider-Man and the Turtles are characters who acquired powers by accident, and in the spirit of a largely Western worldview where individual choice is usually the center of heroic narrative, must grapple with what to do with it. This stuff is built into the basic makeup of these characters at the conception phase, and if you mess with it too much, you start breaking the mechanism that made them work in the first place. But Hollywood keeps doing this for no better reason than laziness and lack of imagination. I mean, I know I sound like a broken record here, but look at this stuff. Spider-Man, Superman, Star Trek, now the Turtles. How many more perfectly good stories is this cheap, lazy gimmick going to wreck? Oh, and hey, if April's dad and White Shredder were the fathers of the Turtles now, you realize that means there's like a 90% chance April's presumably missing dad turns out to be Splinter, right? So yeah, Destiny, usually stupid, almost never works, sick of seeing it trotted out, blah. But you know what's weird though? I can name one recent movie series that actually almost got this 100% right. Can you guess which one? Nope, good guess though, but remember, the gimmick in The Matrix was that it's actually all science and computers, so we're talking about statistical probability, not actual prophecies and fate. The movie series I'm talking about? The Star Wars prequels, and I'll explain how that works next time. So, last week I went off on a tear about how sick to death I am of Destiny as a lazy plot device in Hollywood movies, both literally and implicitly, touched off by the implicit presence of implied destiny, fate, karma, etc. in the more than a little crappy-looking new Ninja Turtles trailer.
But heroes are not born. They're created. That's what your father and I were trying to do. Create heroes.
No, whoa, chill. It's just a mask. See? Don't freak out. Right?
At the tail end, I left you hanging with a teaser that this week I'd explain how one movie series that took what at first seemed like a similarly weak-ass Destiny story and did it right was actually the Star Wars prequel trilogy. And yeah, I know. Look, just to be clear, I'm not here to tell you the prequels are good movies. They aren't. I think they're underrated in some respects, but they aren't good. At best, the first and third one are decent-ish action movies, but Attack of the Clones is a genuinely awful film, and none of them amount to much. See, I'm not here to dredge up the ancient argument over whether episodes 1 through 3 work as films. That's pretty much done. I'm here to talk about their implicit overarching theme, and while clumsily executed to a truly baffling degree, said overarching theme is actually kind of interesting, inasmuch as it functions as a theoretically interesting deconstruction of the heroic destiny narrative device, a narrative device that Hollywood lazily leans on for a lot of modern blockbusters, and is a habit that many attribute to Star Wars, even though that's never actually what Star Wars was about, but we'll come back to that. So, what is the big, broader narrative arc of the prequels, particularly as it relates to our more or less central character Anakin Skywalker? Well, apparently the Jedi have one of these big, dumb prophecies of their very own, that there's a chosen one who's gonna bring balance to the Force and yada yada stupid bullshit. And all of this is taken very seriously, even though the Jedi Council sucks so bad at their job that none of them can figure out that the guy who's walking around acting like a Sith Lord and directly benefiting from every bad thing that happens, which he always has an obvious tangible connection to, is in fact a Sith Lord. So in Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn, who is also so consistently wrong about everything that I was genuinely shocked that he didn't turn out to be Darth Sidious' apprentice this whole time, buys into this big dumb prophecy so much that he decides Anakin must be the chosen one, pretty much because his backstory just sounds too damn Jesus-y for him not to be important.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
And then in Attack of the Clones, we learn that even though Anakin Skywalker is a moody, unstable headcase, and obviously the last person you should ever give a lightsaber to, let alone force powers and police authority, everyone is still just going with it because there's a prophecy. Who put these robed jerk-offs in charge of everything again? And then, in Revenge of the Sith, it turns out that all this stuff, supposedly lined up with the big dumb prophecy about Anakin, was all set in motion behind the scenes by Darth Sidious. Aw man, who could have guessed that except anybody? A whole mess of people die, the universe as we know it falls into totalitarian ruin, and Anakin becomes Space Hitler. So it's a downer ending, and the movies themselves aren't very good. Yuck. But still, that's a pretty nasty and cynical denouement when you stop and think about it. Anakin goes through a bog-standard chosen special guy narrative that we've seen played straight in dozens of other movies even back then, and here not only does it turn out to not work to the worst possible effect, actually believing in the big dumb prophecy is the main way the Jedi let themselves get suckered and almost wiped out. All the warning signs that this was a bad idea were right there in front of them, but they ignored it because prophecy and destiny and all that business. You could literally subtitle the entire prequel saga as Star Wars, Don't Listen to Big Dumb Prophecies, and it'd completely fit. Now granted, this is all still undercut by the writing, directing, and everything really being so ineptly staged, but I have to wonder if this is what Lucas was going for the whole time, dressing down and calling out the lameness of destiny-driven narratives, especially since it rhymes thematically with the original trilogy, where Luke Skywalker's true heroism comes from rejecting the Jedi's designs and finding his own path. No, seriously, remember, in Empire, Obi-Wan and Yoda want Luke to let his friends die on Bespin so he can finish his training, because they know he's not skilled enough to kill Darth Vader yet, and that's the only way they can think of to end the war. In some respects, one could argue that they're still clinging to the Chosen One prophecy after all this time, hoping that Luke will be the one this time if only he'll listen to their plan, which is still nothing beyond become best Jedi, kill the bad guys, hope everything works out after that. But then in Return of the Jedi, it turns out Luke still can't beat Vader in a duel, but he can change his heart and turn him back from the dark side, which was apparently a solution that never occurred to the two old guys. In doing so, Luke repudiates what's left of the old Jedi Order that had failed largely because they were fixated on that big dumb prophecy in the first place. Now again, this doesn't mean that the prequels suddenly become good, just that there's something going on under their surface that's kind of interesting, and if better executed, could have been pretty good. And yes, also that Destiny storylines are so hackneyed and played out at this point that even the universally reviled prequels can be said to have handled it better than a lot of recent blockbusters I could name. How about that? I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.